So, as Senator was saying, there are plenty of shared objectives between the US and Turkey during these meetings that Blinken is having in Ankara. But otherwise, they're on very different sides, aren't they? I mean, we've got in the northeast particularly, we've got them backing different rebel groups. So very interesting to know what those conversations are containing there at the moment.
Yeah, obviously on paper you'd think the US and Turkey should get on because they're both NATO members, they both have shared interests, but once you scratch beneath the surface, and I think Syria is kind of the textbook case of this, you see just how different these countries are, how they see the world differently and how they have different interests and project those interests differently. Turkey's main, I guess, proxy group in Syria is the SNA, the Syrian National Army. So not HTS, but a different rebel group that's actually made up of around 60 rebel groups itself. And their primary objective has not been to fight the regime, but actually to fight the SDF, the Kurdish-led forces in eastern Syria. Now, the issue there is that the SDF are closest to the US. They've managed to basically make a regime in eastern Syria which is not perfect, but it's the closest thing we have to a liberal, secular democracy. And obviously, it's not quite there. But in Syria, you know, you take what you can get. I think in terms of the rule of law and good governance. So the US are very much looking to guarantee the SDF's future. The Turks and Turkey are very much looking to push back the SDF and possibly even end their rule altogether. So completely different interests.
And
there.
so far, it seems like they are, because they've taken Manbij, they've got a truce in Deir ez-Zor. We don't know what's happening in Raqqa yet, but these are key areas that it feels like the SDF are being pushed out of.
Yeah, and part of that is because of US pressure, because they're trying to find an equilibrium between Turkey and between the SDF. So so SDF forces, they withdrew from Deir ez-Zor. They were more pushed out by local Arab tribes who were previously allied to the SDF but switched sides to HTS. But then in areas like Manbij, for example, the SDF actually withdrew, and it looked like it was unilaterally, but actually they withdrew under US pressure because the US was saying, OK, cede some territory here and let the SNA into that power vacuum. And we've basically reached an understanding that then the SNA won't attack other areas of Kurdish and SDF control, like Kobane, for example. We remember that area of fierce fighting there from several years ago. So there is a very, very delicate balance at the moment, and we are hearing signs of progress towards a ceasefire. But on the ground, there are still attacks by the Turkish army. There is still tension. We are not quite there yet.
Absolutely. And when we're talking about all of this, of course, there are so many different acronyms, aren't there, that we are throwing around here. It really speaks to just how many different players are in Syria, how many different competitions for power and how divided potentially it could be. When we're looking at HTS, another acronym, the Hayat Tahrir Shah, in Damascus, taking the lead here with the new administration. Everything seems to be moving smoothly so far, but people really are still holding their breath, aren't they?
Yeah, so we seem to be going through the standard stages when a brutal dictator falls. At the start, you have that elation, you know, brings everyone together. And why not? You know, this was a brutal dictator. The Assad regime killed at least 600,000 of its own people and made millions more homeless, created so much suffering and grief. So it's natural and understandable for people to be happy and just be happy and want to be left in the moment to be happy. But then you move to the second stage, like we're seeing today, grieving, mourning, many people finding out that their relatives who they hoped might be alive are actually no longer so, unfortunately. And then that also opens the door for calls for vengeance. And then there's all these questions about what do we do with former regime operatives, former regime fighters, for example. Do we rehabilitate them or do we put them on trial? And then eventually you get to that kind of question of what does the new normal look like? Not just who's in charge, but also who's running the schools, the electricity, the healthcare, how many hours of these public services are there a day? And that's, in Iraq, from history, is when things started to really break down. Once locals realised in Iraq, once Iraqis found out that actually they were getting less of those things than under Saddam Hussein, that's when discontent started to boil, and then it fermented, and of course then we had a revolution and an uprising against the occupation.
OK. Rob Geist Pinfold, many thanks indeed for coming in.
Thank you.